Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs each Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. on KSFR 101.1 FM, your public radio station. I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy, and
I'm Roxanne Barber, the co-founder of Retake Our Democracy.
As our listeners know by now, we are the co-founders. We are recording this on Thursday, the last day of the session. Because this is the last day, we are recording the show immediately after the session ended, so we can give you the final full assessment of what got done and what failed. We'll get to that discussion in just a moment, but first, a couple of announcements. If you're driving around and miss any of this show, or if you've missed any of our prior shows, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show by going to our homepage at retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on Retake on the Radio. There's a button on the right-hand side of the homepage. It's a big button, and then you can go, and all of our shows are listed there in chronological order. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we're conducting this radio show on stolen Tewa land, and we want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. So throughout the session, the other announcement is that throughout the session, we offered weekly Zoom huddles. We began doing them last year, and they were backed by popular demand this year. The huddles almost always included one or two legislators or representatives from ally organizations who are advancing bills we support. The huddles were a tremendous way to achieve a better understanding of how the legislature really works. Now that the session is over, we will be holding one final debrief huddle on Wednesday, March 9th from 6 to 7:30.
And you are invited.
And you are invited to join us. And all you have to do is go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on NM legislation in the banner, and it'll be right at the top of that page. So let's get started. Oh, I did want to mention that in that Zoom, we're going to talk about what worked and what didn't work, but also about what of our retake strategies worked and what didn't, and how can we improve our advocacy in future sessions. But now let's get started with a debrief. Welcome, Roxanne. For today's show, we're going to kind of trade off questions. So let's get started. I think both of us agree that this was as crazy a session as we've seen in 7 years of advocating at the Roundhouse. Today, we'll try to tease out the strands of that craziness. Let's start with you. Okay. You bear the heaviest responsibility during the session, getting out the alerts every day. In the last week, the speaker announced he would no longer be calling House bills for hearings. Why did he do that, Roxanne? And why was it so hard to assess what Senate bills would be heard each day?
Yeah, thanks. Can I just say first, I think the reason why this session was so difficult is that typically the short sessions only deal with budget, tax, and revenue bills, or things that are related to those. And we had a lot more introduced this year. A lot of things were on the governor's agenda. So there was just too many bills for a 30-day session.
Too many tough bills.
Right. So what happened by Monday of this week, a couple days before the session was over, is in the House, they realized that if a bill hadn't gotten off the House floor yet, hadn't been voted on the House bill, on the House floor, it was never going to have time to get through Senate committees and then the Senate floor to pass. There just wasn't time for that because there were only basically 48 hours left on Monday. So that, I think it was either Sunday night or early Monday morning when Speaker Brian Egolf announced on the floor that they would no longer be hearing any House bills. They would only hear Senate bills. And I think most of the listeners know this, but Senate bills have to go through usually a couple of Senate committees and then get passed on the Senate floor before they go to the House, where they go through a couple of House committees and then finally to the House floor, and so, vice versa. So the only bills that had a chance of getting through at that point were Senate bills that had already gone through the Senate and House committees, been passed, and they were on the House floor for their final vote.
And that makes sense, doesn't it? But what happened that didn't make sense? And by the way, the same thing applies for the Senate. That at some point they stopped hearing Senate bills and only hear House bills because the House bills have already gone through one chamber.
Right.
And by passing it, it goes to the governor.
And very unlikely to get through a couple of committees in another chamber in just 2 days. Well, what happened is then the House and Senate floor calendars are posted at nmlegis.gov. That's the Roundhouse website. But what was posted all the way up until today was not what the bills that they were hearing. So we're not sure why. I think there was just a lot of quick maneuvering. Okay, which bills can we hear that maybe we'll get through? But so we didn't know over the last couple of days of the session. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, right? Wait, I'm sorry, Thursday morning.
Thursday morning. It is Thursday. We went through it. The session's over, dear. No more.
Right, yeah, sorry. Anyway, so we didn't know what was going to be heard. We just had to tune in to the webcast.
And the real problem
listen.
was that the bill list included mostly House bills, even though they said they weren't going to hear any House bills, and just a very few Senate bills. So you just didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And what we heard from the speaker was that they have a printed supplemental agenda that the legislators all see, and that only had Senate bills, but that wasn't apparent to us. So when we would be writing to people to say, oh, this is coming, we couldn't say what it was.
We no longer had the ability to tell people what was being heard and which bills they should be advocating for. But anyway, that was just in the last few days. So there was another sort of manifestation of how crazy this session was, Paul. So do you want to tell people about that?
Yeah, well, I was going to be asking you that, but we're toast. We've had coffee, but no toast, but we are toast. So what happened this morning, Roxanne? That was so weird.
Well, so Paul got up and turned on the House floor session to see, how late did they go last night? Well, guess what? They were still going at when did they finally end at like
9:30 this
so
morning.
what was that, like more than 12 hours or something insane?
Yes, it was more than 12 hours. It was like 14 or 15 hours.
And what was going on was just a lot of talk. We couldn't figure out, they were talking about the voting bill, which
the omnibus voting bill.
SB 144, which never did make it through.
Well,
right?
it did pass the Senate, but then it had to go to the it passed the House and then it had to go to the Senate, but the Senate.
It had to go back to the Senate because so many changes were made.
Right.
For concurrence is the way what they call that. But some of the Democrats.
That's a very quick vote if you can get it up on the agenda, but we'll get to that later.
The legislators, Republicans in the Senate were just yak, filibustering all the way up until the very last minute to take up the time so no bills could be passed. And that's the Democrats were doing that in the House, and I couldn't figure out why. Turns out they get 3 hours for debate, and that time is allocated. So if the Democrats give up the floor during that 3 hours, then the whole rest of the time the Republicans are just going to blah, blah, blah. So instead, the Democrats were talking about things that were actually relevant to the bill to try to use up that 3 hours so that they didn't have to listen to the Republicans.
But it was very weird to know that there was 3 hours left in the session and to hear Democrats talking at length about a bill that wasn't going to ever see the light of day.
Yeah, it's such a waste of time. And, what Paul asked a legislator a year or two ago, why do you allow this talking to go on? And that Democratic, Damian Eli, who's leaving this year, he's not running for re-election, a good guy. We mostly agree with him, not always. He told Paul, well, we got to keep it because if the Republicans ever come back into power, it's really the only way to prevent bills from being passed that you don't want to see passed. So they don't want to change that rule. But
those are like death penalty bills.
It sure does waste an awful lot of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about Hydrogen Hub. Let's not talk too long about Hydrogen Hub because I think we felt like we kind of got up to here with the Hydrogen Hub. But what happened with that this year? It did not pass. Yeah. Luckily for New Mexico, where we're not getting Hydrogen Hub development quite. So there are hydrogen hubs in the state, right?
Right. They're privately funded.
Right, so, but we're not doing any state
and very
funded
small.
hydrogen hub development, at
Yeah,
least
well.
not yet. We hope never.
So
ahead,
what happened was the initial hydrogen bill was HB4. It was a Hydrogen Development Act, Hydrogen Hub Development Act. And in its very first hearing in House Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources, it was killed. It was tabled with a vote by 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats, one of them being Matthew McQueen, the chair. And we thought that we were done. And then all of a sudden, there was a slew of what they call dummy bills. HB2, this is where they have peace, public peace.
It has just a
health and
fake
safety.
name on it. a
Public
fake name.
peace, health and safety, I think is the term.
Right.
And there's like 30 or 40 of them in each chamber. And they're just open
time.
bills that, they can drop in something that they, it's too late to introduce new bills. So that's there. And then they can create a substitute for it and then get it heard. So we had HB 227, HB 228, and then just in the last week, HB 220, all hydrogen bills and all killed summarily. But there were 2 consequences of all of this plethora of hydra heads, as we called them, was twofold. The first one is it just consumed an enormous amount of time among advocates to be hunting and looking for what was next. And then just
How they were going to disguise it, you mean?
yeah, how they were going to disguise it, and then texting and writing to legislators. No. They're going to tell you it's all great, but this is the truth about hydrogen. And Retake did an analysis with Renewable Taos, and together we put together a pretty compelling 2-page thing that summarized all the research and government reports that had pretty much disputed that hydrogen was even possible. But in any case, so it consumed a lot of energy, but beyond that, it turned advocates into paranoids. I mean, it was crazy. Every 5 seconds, you got a text saying, oh my God, it's coming again in X bill, whether it's the Clean Fuels Act or whether it was the Public Power for Broadband Act. And then you immediately had to comb through those bills very carefully to look for the word hydrogen or to see if any of that language was in there.
Yeah.
And it made for a very unsettling session.
Yeah, and then in the end, it did not get through. So that.
It was defeated, but as Patty Lundstrom said on the floor at the end of the session yesterday, it was an afternoon session, so not the session that started yesterday at 6 and then ended at 9 in the morning, but an earlier one. She said, oh, I'm not giving up on hydrogen. We'll be back.
No, she's not, but doesn't mean she's going to get it.
No. So we defeated that. And that was the centerpiece supposedly the centerpiece of the governor's agenda. So Roxanne, how did the governor wind up doing? Will she have any wins to run on in November?
Well, I'm sure she's unhappy that she did not get her hydrogen hub. But she did get the crime omnibus bill, where they rolled 2 or 3 crime bills into one. So that will probably make her look good in certain communities with the election coming up. Gross receipts tax cuts and personal income tax cuts in HB 163.
Yeah, and that passed the House on a concurrence vote at 3 a.m. on Thursday.
3 a.m. this morning.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, but you'll be listening to this radio show on Saturday. Sorry. 36% cap on small loans. Thank goodness that finally got through. That we should have done that a couple of years ago, but it finally happened. So we won't have people as impacted by those predatory lenders, not 175%. Now it's 36% max. She also got free college tuition, Opportunity Scholarship Act. So anyone in New Mexico who's a resident who wants to go to college you can get a vocational degree or an AA.
You can even go part-time.
Or a bachelor's degree, right? Yeah. So part-time because you got to work, right? Gets free college tuition and fees. So that's great. We're really happy about that. There was a big increase in K-12 funding. You're saying it's 7%, right? Paul?
7%.
Yeah. So, and probably the best part about that is teachers are going to get raises because there's so many vacant teaching jobs.
And for the campaign, that'll make the teachers union very happy. And that's a
Right.
big part of the campaign.
So maybe we'll be able to recruit some good teachers and get some of those spots filled. Because education has taken such a hit during COVID. And on top of it, we've lost a lot of teachers. And then there was healthy budget surplus, right?
Right.
So tax cuts, crime legislation, free college, teacher raises, and a surplus. So that should make a lot of voters happy.
I can see the flyers now
The
arriving
re-election,
in your mailbox soon.
election's going to be coming up.
I need to take a little bit of a break right now to remind our listeners that KSFR is more important than ever in these times of misinformation. You get the straight scoop from KSFR. And if you appreciate that as much as we do, maybe after you get done listening to this show, you can go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button and make a $10, $20, $50 donation and view it as your ticket for admission to all kinds of great programming. So,
yeah. So other than the bills that we just talked about, sort of in the governor's package, tell us what else passed.
well,
that we think
among
is-
our bills that we were particular, and by our bills, I mean, we supported them. We didn't write them.
and we've managed advocacy for those bills with a
Right.
lot of people across the state.
So the most important win, I think, by far, is HB 132. That's the small loan rate
Which
cap
we
at
just talked about.
36%.
Yeah.
But that was a huge effort getting that done. It consumed a lot of energy and will be of great benefit to low-income New Mexicans who are otherwise preyed upon by the predatory lending industry. I would say we also got HM3, which was a paid family and medical leave study. At least we're going to be studying it now. We can take a look at the benefits and maybe then next year we can get it through the legislature. HB 37, which was a, community energy efficiency block grant, which gets energy efficiency funding out to low-income communities and low-income people who don't typically, improve their homes to consume, so they consume less energy and contain
So
heat.
that's everything from adding insulation, maybe adding solar. Would it cover solar insulation?
no.
Okay, sorry. So it's just,
Energy efficiency.
all right, energy efficient appliances and things like that.
Right.
Sure.
And then health security got the funding it needed to continue its study and design process. And all of those bills will provide immediate direct benefit to low-income New Mexicans in rural New Mexico, or future benefits, especially health security when it finally comes into play. So we had some big wins, not as many as we would have liked. And that's because so many of our bills wound up not getting through because of time. Roxanne, do you want to bring the bad
Well,
news?
a couple of last minute, there was that voting rights bill, which combined, I think, 3 bills, SB 8, SB 6, into SB 144. It looked like it was going to make it. It was passed on the House floor just this morning?
Yeah, 9 o'clock this morning.
But then it had to go back to the Senate. I think we mentioned this earlier, for concurrence because of amendments that were made after the Senate had passed it. Well, that never made it. There was no time for concurrence. So that died.
There was plenty of time, but we'll tell you why there wasn't time.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, public power went nowhere. That maybe had some issues with how the bill was written, but I know the advocates are going to try that again. The Green Amendment again died. Maybe needs a little more education around that. I kept hearing the same arguments over and over, like, oh, we're going to be sued and it's going to cost a lot of money. But basically, it's just will eventually, when it's passed, it'll go to the voters for final approval, but it'll just make the state do what it's supposed to be doing in terms of protecting the environment, protecting people's rights to clean air and water. Public banking died again this year. That probably needs to another year or so, I hope not much longer, of education.
It's worth keeping in mind what Senator Worth told us years ago, is that sometimes big ideas take 3 or 4 sessions to get through.
Yeah.
And that's silly,
This
but
is
it's
only
true.
this was the second or the third session for public banking, maybe the second.
Second session.
Yeah, it takes a while for people to get used to these ideas. It also takes a while for them to get educated so they really understand what the bill's about. I just kept hearing opponents say, this is a problem in search of this is a solution in search of a problem. Well, there is a big problem, several problems that public banking could solve in New Mexico. We don't have time to talk about it today, but we will talk about it again in the future. Independent redistricting did not get through. Anything to do with paid legislature did not get through. And the issue around not paying our legislators leads to a lot of the problems that we see. They don't have professional paid staff. They're not paid. They don't have the time to look, educate themselves on the issues. That's part of what we do. We take our democracy tries to do with legislators, is to educate them. We forgot to mention HB 22, limited English access to state programs. That did pass. That was sort of on our supplementary list. HB 6, that clean futures, we had mixed feelings on that one.
We're probably just as glad that it didn't make it.
Yeah, that one needed a lot of work.
We had reluctantly supported it with the need for great amendments.
Right.
That didn't ever happen, and the bill died.
As far as we know, none of the water bills got through, which is very unfortunate because some of them were moving along, but they just didn't have time to get through. That second chance bill, that's unlawful access to firearms by minors, where the parents would suffer some consequences if a minor got a hold of a gun that was owned by the parent or someone else in the household. That was pulled. I think Senator Cedillo Lopez, we asked her about that. She said she pulled it.
No, that was for the second chance. Isn't about the gun bill. It's about the no.
Oh,
life,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I conflated
sentence.
Those. That's no life sentence for a minor, or once they've served
without parole
15 years, then they can come up to a parole hearing and possibly be released.
And we talked with Antoinette about that this morning, and she was saying that the amendments they were putting into it were just so bad that they withdrew them.
And that was SB 43. So I'm sure she's going to try to get that through again next year. The one that I was confusing that with is HB 9, and that was unlawful access to firearms by minor, and that got stuck in House Appropriations and Finance, never went anywhere. And then some of these, energy bills, HB 11, energy storage tax credit, was never heard in House Transportation, House Tax and Revenue, I'm sorry. HB 34, solar market tax credit also died in House Tax and Revenue. HTRC's House Tax and Revenue, right, Paul? Just checking. HB 35, which is the geothermal ground pumps, also died in House Tax and Revenue. Seeing a pattern here.
A lot of death in
the housing bill, HB 65, was on the agenda for Senate Judiciary. It said on the nmlegis.gov website this morning, but it never got heard as far as we know. So that was the last Senate committee it had to go through. It could have gone to the Senate for, could have been passed. All right. So Andrea Romero, that rep, will probably introduce that again. This was the second or third year she had introduced it, right? And then the SB 21 EV tax credit, electric vehicle, died in Senate Judiciary as well.
So I'd like to talk just a little bit about some of the impediments that make it so difficult for us to get those kinds of bills through. And there's really about 2 or 3 I'm going to mention. The first is the influence of industry. I hate to go back to the predatory lending bill, but it's relevant. In 2021, SB 66, with a 36% rate, was one committee assignment, one committee hearing away from getting the House floor, and then it would have passed last year, a 36% cap. but it was hijacked at the last minute by an industry amendment introduced by Representative Alcon. I shouldn't really say it was introduced by it. He did a sentence about it and then just turned to the lobbyist he brought with him, handed in the bill and said, I don't really know very much about the amendment. He'll talk for me. And he did. And it was to raise the rates to 99%. And that didn't fly very well once it got to the Senate. And so there was no concurrence and that bill died and the rates remained at 175. So it was industry involvement at the last minute.
Right. And part of that, though, again, is going back to the fact that we have an unpaid legislature. They don't have experts they can rely on. Most of their experts, if not all, are industry lobbyists. And that's how they learn about these issues and these bills. So it's not
So
really
fast
very
forward
democratic.
to a couple of days ago, to yesterday, and SB 14, the Clean Fuels Act, was hijacked by PNM at the last minute with an amendment that would have opened the door for them to have created a gas plant, and that would have then potentially run for another 20 years. And they were using the brownout rumors of
The threat of
brownouts and blackouts
This
in
summer.
the summer as a vehicle for leverage. And so at the last minute, this bill was one vote away from getting to the Senate floor, the House floor. And it was hijacked and that amendment was made. And, it's the irony is that the very next day, the PRC announced, or that same day, the PRC announced, I just read about it the next day, had announced that they had come to a deal with PNM about how to address the brownouts. And so there was it was a solution in search of a problem that didn't exist.
Mhm.
But lobbyists come in at the last minute and say, we really need to do this or we're going to have brownouts. And the last thing Democrats want and the last thing environmentalists want is the first summer of renewable energy in New Mexico full of brownouts.
Well, and they use that to instill fear in average people across the state. Oh, there's going to be brownouts.
So I'm going to have to fly because we've got a minute and a half. The other part that I would say is just the undemocratic, untransparent process, which makes constituent participation difficult, if possible. The last minute scheduling, the published agendas that are not being used, hearings and votes occurring between midnight and 4 a.m. Who watches then? Ridiculous 3-hour debates with endless GOP filibustering. And what we heard in the Senate this morning as the voting rights bill was waiting to be heard, Senator Scherer spoke for an hour and a half about baseball and New Mexico history. And it just went on and on and on. And then the session ended without being able to hear that.
I hope he gets laryngitis.
No, he does that every year. And it's just, we've got to figure out a way to not do that. And, Damian Eli said, well, it's their only tool if we're out of power. Maybe it should be about if a party has control of the legislator, they deserve the right to have their agenda. That's not easy to say when you know that if the Republicans are in charge, it's death penalty time. So
Yeah.
That's all we have time for today. I want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll be back next week with Liz Stefanik. Senator Stefanik will be my guest. And remember the huddle on March 9th at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay active. It's
Thanks
the
for
only way we
listening.
fix this mess. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What was it supposed to be?
28:30.